Okay, so we're gonna be a little bit ambitious and already make an app with the UI, that's the user interface, because we want to start making real apps that run on iPhone and iPad as soon as possible. It's gonna be a dice rolling app and it'll look like this. In this lesson you'll see a fair bit of code that looks unfamiliar to you, but don't worry about that. You don't need to understand all the code we'll use just yet, and being a little bit ambitious is a fast way to learn. Okay, so when you open Xcode, you should create an Xcode project this time instead of a playground. It'll give you a few templates to choose from, and for this app we're going to go with the single view application. Next, Xcode will ask you to fill in some details about your app. So in the first line, you just put in the name of your app, and the next line is the name of your organization. And if you don't have an organization, just make something up, basically. The third line is a little bit more interesting. It's actually a unique identifier for your organization, and it's usually your domain name, so that's basically your website address in reverse. This is used to generate a unique ID for your app in the next line, which is then used in the App Store to distinguish your app from other apps. We'll set the devices option to universal, which basically just means iPhone and iPad. So now that we've created the Xcode project, let's go ahead and switch to Xcode and start working on our UI. After having created your project, the first thing you'll see looks like this. And what's important to know is that the files in your project are shown on the left. So let's go ahead and click the main storyboard, which is where we'll do the basic visual design of the app. Okay, so the empty box that's kind of in the middle of the screen and says View Controller at the top is basically what the app will look like when running on an actual device. We'll use this to build the basic UI. So before we get started, the UI works with views, okay? A view is basically an element on the screen, so it could be maybe a text field or an image or a button. And in this case, the app has two views. So that's one button, which you press to roll the dice, right? And then one image to display the side of the dice that's been rolled. Okay, so let's start by inserting the image view. Okay, so now we have an image view, but we still need to say where on the screen it should be and how big it should be. We can do that using constraints, which you can create using the little buttons at the bottom of the screen. And I'll just add two constraints right now that center the image view horizontally and vertically on the screen. We also want the image view to be square, so we'll constrain the width and the height so that they're equal to each other. And finally, we'll click Update Frames so that we can see the changes that we've made. Alright, so let's go and insert the button now. So let's just change the font size and the text of the button real quick. And let's center the button horizontally as well, give it a margin of 32 points with respect to bottom, and update the frames again. And there we go, that's what our basic UI is going to look like. So we now have an image view, but we still need images to populate the image view. And before we can use an image in our project, we need to add it in the asset catalog. So I'll just go and open Finder and drag in the images I want. And normally we would have each image at several different resolutions because we want our images to look nice and sharp on every device. But in this case, the images we're using are vectors, which means they can scale infinitely and stay sharp. So in this case, we can just set the scale factors to single vector like this. Okay, now we just have to drag and drop these guys in here. And then we can use those images in our app. Okay, so let's go back to the main storyboard and set the default image for our image view. There we go. Alright, so we're gonna click the view controller file and we can finally start doing some coding. The code that is already here is auto-generated, but we don't need that, so we'll just replace it by this. You don't have to understand all the code just yet. We'll just zoom in on the important bits and ignore the rest for now. Okay, so this is all the code we need for our app. As I mentioned before, you don't need to understand every part yet. We'll just, look at the interesting parts and ignore the rest for now. So the first line we're going to talk about is this one. In this line, we've declared a variable, just like in the last lesson, remember? And basically we're saying that there is a variable called ImageView of type UI ImageView. You can ignore the exclamation mark for now. And at the start of the line it says add IB outlet. IB stands for Interface Builder, which is the thing where we made the basic UI. And because we put add IB outlet in front of this variable is going to show up in the Interface Builder, and we'll link this variable to the image view we inserted in the Interface Builder. Okay, so we're gonna take this variable, and because we put IB outlet in front of it, it's going to show up in the Interface Builder, and we can link it to our image view that we inserted. And from that point on, the value of this variable called image view is going to be a reference to the image view we inserted in the Interface Builder. This next piece of code is called a function, and we'll talk more about functions in the next lesson, but basically what it is a piece of code that can be executed multiple times. It says IB action in front, so this will also show up in the Interface Builder, but this time it's going to show up as an action that we can link to a certain event, right? And that's exactly what we need, because we want this piece of code to be executed every time you press the roll button. Because basically what these few lines do is that they randomly select a new image for our image view, so one of the sides of the dice, okay? In the first line of the function, we're declaring a constant. It's called image names, and it's an array, okay? An array is basically an ordered list of things, so each thing has a position in the array, which is called the index. In this case, the array is an array of strings, and a string in programming is just a piece of text. You can visualize an array like this. So it's basically like a box that contains other boxes in a certain order, right? The order is indicated in the picture by the numbers under the boxes. And note, and this is very important, that the indices start at 0 and not at 1. Okay, this is a mistake a lot of new programmers make, is they start counting at 1 because that's what you normally do, but in programming you start counting at 0. Also important to know is that in an array we can't mix the types of things that are in the array. So this is an array of strings, so it only holds strings. Okay, so in this next line, we're generating a random number between 0 and 5, and we're going to use that to pick a random element from the array. Okay, so you don't need to worry about how we generate the random number, but that's basically just what we're doing. For this example, we're going to assume that it randomly generated the number 2, so we get a new box with the name index and the value 2 inside. The third line in the function is interesting. What's happening is that we're declaring a constant called ImageName with the value of whatever is in the ImageNames array at the index we just randomly generated, right? So we randomly generated the number, and we're going to look in the array, find whatever is at that position. So, the randomly generated number is the position, right? And set whatever element we find at that position as the value of ImageName. So in this example, we're assuming that the randomly generated number is 2, right? But of course it could be anything between 0 and 5. So the value of ImageName will be whatever we find in the ImageNames array at the position 2, okay? So in this case, that would be the string that says dice3. So we can access an element in the array by typing the name of the array, followed by the index of the element we want to access between square brackets. And basically in the final line, what we're doing is we're updating the image of ImageView to whatever image has the name we just randomly selected. Okay, so let's go back to Xcode. All we have to do now is link our ImageView to the variable called ImageView, and link the event of the button being pressed to the roll function being executed. So we're going to go back to the main storyboard and right click this guy here. And then we can link the ImageView variable to the ImageView in our UI. And we can link the roll action to the roll button being pressed. Okay, so that's it. Let's test it out on the iPhone 6. Okay, so I'm gonna roll it a couple times. Looks like a nice and random dice to me. So I think that's about enough for one lesson. You can of course find all the code and the images in the description, and see you next lesson.